Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to today's webinar, Municipalities Building Monarch Communities. My name is Donna Marie Duffin. I'm the Monarch and Pollinator Coordinator with Missourians for Monarchs, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we officially begin, I want to review just a few items regarding today's webinar. So today's webinar will have 5 presenters. So to ensure we stay on schedule, rather than having a Q&A session after each presentation, we will have one main Q&A session at the end of the final presentation. Now, of course, you can submit your questions throughout the entire webinar using the built-in Q&A feature. The icon is usually located at the bottom of your Zoom window as indicated on the image on the screen. And additionally, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to leave before the webinar ends, or if you know someone who wasn't able to attend in person today, you will be able to access the webinar in its entirety. We will post the webinar on our YouTube channel, as well as links on our website and our social media channels. So if you're not already following us on social media, of course, please do so. And you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as Mo for Monarchs, as well as our webpage, moformonarchs.org. Additionally, if you have any questions after the presentation that we might not be able to get to during the Q&A session, or you think of something later, or if you just like to get in contact with one of today's presenters, you can contact me or our communications coordinator, Elizabeth Egan, and we can assist you. And of course, you can always go to our website, moformonarchs.org, and you can contact us that way as well. Now, if you're attending today's webinar, you're probably already familiar with some of the challenges monarchs and other pollinators have been facing in recent years and decades. Monarch populations have been steadily declining, with a total population decline of around 90%. And one of the primary causes for this decline is loss of quality habitat. And when most people think of monarch or pollinator habitat, they envision habitat spread across several acres or fields of habitat. In effect, there's a misconception among many that suburban or urban settings can't really contribute much to monarch habitat, let alone other wildlife habitat. But research has actually shown that quality monarch habitat in suburban and urban settings benefits a plethora of wildlife species, in addition to its intended benefactors, the monarchs and pollinators. In truth, for these species, the infamous movie quote, "If you build it, they will come," rings very true. In fact, establishing quality habitat throughout suburban and urban landscapes can create a greatly needed corridor for monarchs for both feeding and breeding as they move through Missouri in both the fall and the spring. So the one thing that we Missourians can all do to help monarchs and pollinators is create quality monarch and pollinator habitat. And today's webinar focuses on exactly that, monarch and pollinator habitat, and in particular, suburban and urban habitat. Today's presenters will discuss various aspects of monarch and pollinator habitat and its creation. And while we may not be able to answer every question with just this one webinar, we hope to at least create a foundation of understanding and provide an avenue of resources to help municipalities and their communities create monarch and pollinator habitat. And with that, we will begin our webinar. Our first presenter today is Mary Nemecek. Mary is an avid conservationist who serves as conservation chair and sits on the board for Burroughs Audubon Society of Greater Kansas City. Mary also holds a seat on the board of directors for Missouri Parks Association and the steering committee for KC Wildlands, as well as being a member of the Missouri Bird Records Committee and a contributing reviewer for eBird here in Missouri. Mary, when you're ready, you can begin sharing your screen.
Thank you. If somebody can give me a thumbs up that that's working.
Looks good, Mary.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to talk to you about a grant that we put together here in Kansas City. It was a bi-state large collaborative grant back in 2015. And that was the first year that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation offered grants for monarch habitat. So to start with, I thought we would just take a little journey back to actually what happened prior to 2015 that made that year, in my opinion, so pivotal. As you know, everybody talks about the monarch population decline, but I thought it would be good to visit exactly what that means. Monarch populations are determined by an assessment of the number of monarchs on the overwintering grounds in Mexico. So this week, typically August 31st, which is Day of the Dead, and November 1st, which is All Saints Day, monarchs start to flood in to the mountains of Mexico. And they will spend their winter on these oil mill fir trees down there. And for generations, the folklore has always been that these monarchs are returning to Mexico, that they carry the souls of the dearly departed. So the villagers in the area thought, gosh, these are our dearly departed coming back to spend the winter with us. And no one knew here where monarchs went in the winter until their overwintering grounds were discovered in 1976. So overwintering assessments are done based on the number of hectares that the monarchs cover. And as you can see, starting in the 90s, we were typically half a dozen up to just under 20 hectares. A hectare is about 2.5 acres of monarch coverage. And so there's a formula, they assess how much ground they cover, and then there's a formula they use to kind of determine how many monarchs are present down there. 2012 and 2013 saw, the winter of 2012, 2013 saw a big dip, but nothing compared to what happened in 2013 and 2014. They were down to about 1.5 acres. And at that point, no one knew what the point was of no return for the monarchs. At what level do their populations become so low that we lose most of the the migratory portion of the North American monarchs? And it was realized that something had to start to be done. 2014, 2015 winter came in and it was really not much better. So that's when these programs started to increase monarch habitat. And the issue that monarchs have, like most caterpillars, is they only feed on one plant or family of plants. So for monarchs, that's milkweed. And because of the invention of multiple things, habitat destruction through using land for other purposes or herbicide-resistant crops that eliminated milkweed from row cropping, the amount of milkweed diminished, which was believed to contribute to this monarch decline that we've seen. So the plan was in place to plant more monarch habitat, and that included milkweed, and that also included other native plants. One of the benefits of this is by using other native plants, you also get the benefit that those native plants use. About 80% of their biomass can be below ground, so they're great for filtering water, stabilizing soil, and then their wildlife value for monarchs and pollinators. So in 2015, NIFWF launched its first monarch habitat grants, and we applied as a collaborative in Kansas City to put together a consortium of state, county, city, and community projects to develop this vision of wildlife corridors. So a lot of times we'll have areas that are great pollinator respites, but they're not connected to the next one. And what we saw was this vision of corridors or stepping stones where monarchs and pollinators could start to move through these biodiversity highways, so to speak. So the grant was awarded. It was just under $230,000, and it was to improve or restore 1,400 acres of monarch habitat in Kansas City. Our county partner, which was probably the biggest bang for the buck and what has yielded the largest sum gain, was Johnson County, Kansas. We partnered with them. I've known Matt Garrett, who's their wildlife biologist, for years. And when we started looking at this project, I asked him, I said, if you could have anything you wanted, what do you want? And he said, I've got 100 acres below the dam at Shawnee Mission Park, and I would like to restore that into monarch habitat. So when we put the grant together, there were two things we wanted to address. One was seed and land and ground preparation for that 100 acres below the dam at Shawnee Mission Park. And the second one was to give them a way to collect seed on either remnants that they currently manage or restorations, reconstructions that they were putting in, to allow them to have seed to either increase diversity in existing plantings or put in more. So of that, the first part was a flail vac. This was something that Matt had picked out that he had wanted a better name for. It's probably a seed stripper. This was built in Utah, and it was hauled to Kansas City on the back of a truck, pulled behind the truck from Utah to Kansas City and dropped off in Shawnee Mission Park. And they use this every fall to go out. Matter of fact, he's starting it now, to go out and go through fields that they want to collect seed off of. Now, it's not seed specific, so it collects a diversity of seed, and they can collect several hundred pounds with this, and then they can clean that seed and use it to enhance, like I said, current plantings or as seed for new areas that they want to put in. And then the second part of that was the 1,000 acres below the dam at Shawnee Mission Park. That 100 acres below the dam at Shawnee Mission Park. That 100 acres had previously been agriculture. It had been left fallow, so much of it had turned into a Johnson grass field. And it took a couple of years of spraying to eradicate it and make it ready for planting. But one of the big learnings that we had out of this was the first project that Matt used Coreopsis as a cover crop. So a lot of times people use cover crops of annual rye or something else in order to allow that native seed bank to become established. By using this Coreopsis tinctura, there was an immediate pop the first year. So immediately the public was drawn to the area, knew that something special was happening there. But it also provided plants for pollinators that first year. And then as the planting progresses, that Coreopsis doesn't like competition, so it will die back. So by the third year, it's pretty hard to find the planting. But the first year, it's really spectacular. And like I said, a good start to pave the way for what comes in the following years. And I wish these pictures were in better sunlight, but it just looks absolutely fantastic now. It's just a mosaic of different colors. They have areas where people will constantly take pictures, so they've kind of had to continue to restore because they get a little bit trampled. But it's inspired so much. And one of the things is, I'm a birder, and when this was a Johnson grass field, when the LeConte sparrows would migrate in the fall, birders would go down there to get their sparrows for the year. And when we first started eradicating that, there was a lot of complaints from the birding community. And I'm like, hang on, it's coming. And of course, as you can see now, the bird diversity has just exploded along with the pollinator diversity. There are times when this entire field is just in motion from the pollinators. It also spurred this Eagle Scout project, which was a bee hotel. And there's a great interpretive sign on the back of that. But lots of love for this planting that's gone in. It's now in its 5th year. For state, we partnered with MoDOT. And actually, the city of Lee Summit became a prominent partner in this. We wanted to create 40 acres of pollinator habitat along highways in Kansas City. And at that time, Danny Woods was the MoDOT director for Kansas City. He was fantastic to work with. And he was all for this project. So Lee Summit had a plan to actually have native habitat on the highways leading into their city. And so we partnered with them and put in 40 acres along 291, 470, and other areas in southern Lee Summit. It was piecemeal, so some of it was in the medians and some of it were these larger interchange areas. And for city, we had a multitude of projects. Bridging the Gap led the way on these. They helped area municipalities plant 50 monarch gardens. Well, their goal was, I should say, because you're going to find out they exceeded it, to help municipalities plant 50 monarch gardens and 125 homeowner gardens while conducting educational workshops. And this was spurred by Doug Talamy's thought about if every yard had a little bit of habitat, how we could create this large national park acreage. And so we wanted to give homeowners some plants and some education so that they could start to incorporate monarch habitat into their residence. What they ended up doing was 129 monarchs were given to citizens' businesses, 129 monarch gardens were given to citizens' businesses and schools. They installed 50 monarch gardens in 13 metro cities and counties, 120 hours of education to residents, and 52 hours of education to city employees. And this was one of those workshops. This was actually held at a residence that has a fantastic native planting in their yard, as you can see. Really great attendance on this. And the yard was just spectacular. And it was really great to be able to see native plantings in a residence working that had been there established. And if you go online, and I can put this up later, but this link will take you to an online connection. Their pamphlet of where they put these gardens and the pictures of them going in is still available online. It's a beautiful pamphlet. And then for city and community, we were able to get Mayor Sly James at the time to sign the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. And as you can see, there he is with the Missourians for Monarch sign. And if you notice his bow tie, it is appropriate for the occasion. This was actually done at Ellis Davis Park, and there were natives that were added to this garden behind him at the time that he signed the Monarch Pledge. And then we also partnered with the city of Kansas City. The crown jewel in their park system is Luce Park. And right outside of the garden office, there was a bed that we converted to natives. Now, this had been a highly curated bed that had usually annuals like cannas and other things that were planted in it. And while they were 100% supportive when we wanted to put natives in there, I will say that I think they were wringing their hands a bit behind the scenes, trying to figure out how this was all going to turn out. But Kansas City Native Plant Initiative at the time, now Deep Roots, and the Westport Garden Club took on ownership of this. And as you can see, planting day was great fun, and this garden has just continued to thrive. Really a nice showcase for what can be done with natives. And it's also a great spot. They've done several community education programs on native plants, Osteloega to the Monarchs. Lots of great community outreach came out of this project that's still thriving and still maintained by the Westport Garden Club. We also partnered with Kansas City on some events. This was actually a fishing derby. Dan Ash was director of U.S. Fish and Wildlife at the time, and he came to Kansas City and helped plant a monarch garden at this urban park that had really nothing native in it. It had bush honeysuckle and grass, and so we were able to introduce a little spot for monarchs there. And then this is kind of a private Kansas City venture. This is a trash receptacle. It's the side of a cinder block trash receptacle. It actually sits on private property, but it's right next to the town of Kansas Bridge and property for Kansas City. And we asked, this was again a KCNPI, now Deep Roots project, asked Amanda Guillen to do an interpretive monarch collage for the side of this. And I just cannot say enough about it. If you look at the monarch, it's feeding on the aster, but then you trace the red trail to the caterpillar to the milkweed. So each of these butterflies has a path for both a plant that it would nectar on, as well as its host plants. And this is still down there. But the other great part about it is this brick or cement enclosed area is a garden that it's a piece of land that Kansas City owned that was just weeds. And we were able to provide plantings for it. There was a resident that lived in the building at the time that wanted to take care of it. And I would say, if you asked me what garden I thought had the least chance of making it, it was probably this one. This area, well, first of all, it was a resident that maintained it, but she was out of town for long stretches of time. There was another resident in the building that didn't like it, that would take those opportunities to pull things or spray things. And it was an area that sometimes was frequented by homeless sleeping in the garden, etc. And so I just really worried. I just did not think this garden would ever make it. But it's been taken over by multiple people, and it is just a fantastic native plant garden. The natives now go all the way up to the mural, and it's just alive with color. And then the last part is a little bit about schools. So some of our plants went to partner with local school districts in different projects. Some were projects arranged directly with the school, and some of them were Eagle Scout projects. And I want to show you a couple of these Eagle Scout projects because they just turned out so great. So this is a courtyard at a local elementary school. And one of the Eagle Scouts, whose sister still attended the school, and he had gone there himself, this was always kind of an eyesore. There was no way to get into it really. It was a lot of weeds. The mowing was inconsistent. And so he took it upon his Eagle Scout project to transform this. And this is the planting, and this is what it looks like. And the family continued to maintain this interior courtyard. They would actually do the mowing included. but also making sure the plants were established and then any weeding that needed to go on. And it turned out, I think, absolutely stunning. The second one, this is also an elementary school. This was a second Eagle Scout project. This was the area in front of the school. This was their landscaping, where these bushes in this area that was mostly mulch that had washed away. And he secured a plan from some professionals. He had them help him with the plan, secured some rocks, and then we helped with the planting. And this is what it looked like the second year it was installed. Pretty stunning, huh? And then lastly, this is my son's school. Parking lot islands are a really great place to put natives in. Not much wants to grow there because they're dry, they're not irrigated. At the school, they were grass, and it was hard to mow it because you had to lift the mower onto the parking lot island. A lot of areas were kind of clay and rock, and so the grass didn't want to grow there. And so we use these plantings to these native plants to kind of improve 4 of the larger parking lot islands that were there. And this is what it looks like now. The landscape coreopsis particularly loves this. It is just a splash of yellow in the spring. And then we have other things that come in. So right now, the goldenrod, we have cliff goldenrod in there and some aromatic asters that are blooming. And the last thing I wanted to say was the importance of this grant in education. So not just the education for residents, but also the education and outreach for municipalities that have large landscapes that want to maintain them. Putting in a native planting is fantastic, but it requires ongoing expertise and skill in maintaining it. And not that it's a lot of work, but it is some work because we live in an environment where invasive plants will tend to creep up, and there's just a certain amount of maintenance that needs to be done. So these are a couple of workshops that we held. One is Larry Rizzo here talking about how to get rid of woodies in a native planting. And then the other one is a large landscape workshop that we did out at Shawnee Mission Park in that planting that we did down below the dam, where we talked to them about how to properly prepare and seed a site, and then what's required for ongoing maintenance. So that was our project. I'm extremely proud of it. So many of these projects are still thriving. I think Johnson County Park has put in almost 1,000 acres above the 100 acres that we put in at the dam since then. They've just really exploded. Matt Garrett will say, nobody plants more prairie than I do. And he's right. He is just any place he can put it. He's done a wonderful job. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. We appreciate that presentation, and especially all of the inspiring images of monarch and pollinator habitat in the urban settings and all the great information. And again, just a reminder, if you have any questions for Mary, and if you're anything like me and you're afraid you might forget your question, if you have to wait till the end to submit it, you can always submit your question now and we'll just answer it at the end. Our next presenter today is Kirstin Underwood. Kirstin is a fish and wildlife biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Gulf of Maine Coastal Program in Falmouth, Maine. Kirstin has roots in an underserved region of rural Maine and has always been passionate about supporting conservation initiatives in underprivileged communities for the people in those communities. She has a degree in biology from Hartwick College and has worked on fisheries, aquatic monitoring, and salt marsh research projects on both coasts through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, and National Wildlife Refuge System. Kirstin served in the Peace Corps as an environment and agriculture volunteer in rural Tanzania in 2016 and has tried to carry the lessons learned from the youth and farmers in her station village back to the coastal program in Maine. Kirstin, if you're ready, you can begin sharing your screen.
Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, great. Oh, there we go. All right, well, first of all, I'm really excited to be joining you all the way from Maine today, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. And I hope you can all get some value information here from the work that we're doing in Maine. And I want to thank Eric Topper, my colleague at Maine Audubon, who I collaborated with on this presentation. So I'll start with a little background information about the Gulf of Maine Coastal Program. We're based in Falmouth, Maine, and all of the work that we do is based around partnerships. We work with private landowners as well as state, municipal, federal, academic, and non-governmental organizations. And although we do have a focus on coastal habitats, we have the flexibility to work across watersheds and jurisdictional boundaries to achieve our conservation objectives. Two of our regional priorities, connecting people to nature and strategic conservation, are particularly relevant to native plant revegetation projects, and I'll be talking about some of those today. So I'm going to talk about a new urban partnership that formed between the Coastal Program and Maine Audubon Society in 2017. This was right around the time I joined the office. Our organizations had a shared overarching conservation goal to restore native plant habitat for birds and pollinators across the city of Portland, Maine. But we specifically wanted to do this with a human-centered focus. And the human dimension was a really important part of the ecological landscape for us. We wanted the community and all of its parts to be represented in the work that we did, and make an effort to include audiences that have been traditionally excluded or underrepresented in the conservation field. And finally, we wanted to increase public awareness in general about the benefits of native plants across the entire community of Portland, or at least more of it. These are the audiences who we specifically wanted to engage. We had a focus on newly resettled residents in the city of Portland. Portland is not officially declared a sanctuary or a safe city, but we're known as a welcoming one to immigrants and refugees and people seeking asylum. And the city has had a steady flow and influx of refugees and asylum seekers, especially over the last few years. We had another focus on youth, particularly high school and middle school students, and we had this overall more lofty goal to be more inclusive of the entire Portland community across demographics and socioeconomic groups. In this case, we thought the best way to engage these young people was to focus on public schools. There were already some programs in place here that were specifically tailored for English language learners and newly resettled students. And kids of all ages also spread news by word of mouth to their families, which can help get the word about our projects across communities. And to work across this much larger group of all Portland residents, we tried to focus on high visibility and high access green spaces in the city for our native plant revegetation projects. And we thought this was our best chance to engage the maximum amount of people in our projects. We really approached this work first with a human-centered design, and our end goal was to create a meaningful, sustainable, and participatory community project. This diagram outlines the building blocks and the process to successfully design these types of projects. This is drawing from common themes in the open standards for conservation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Urban Standards of Excellence, but there are a variety of different community project models that draw from these 5 common themes. So the first step in this process is really to just take a step back. Take the time to learn about a community and listen to the people who live there, rather than going in and deciding what it needs and what's to do. Research community-based organizations, go to libraries and community centers, or go to the YMCA, find out who the leaders are and the programs that are working well. It makes a lot more sense to build onto things that are already working than to reinvent the wheel. The next step is to develop relationships with these community leaders. Maine Audubon had a long-standing relationship with schools in Portland and with other community-based organizations, and they're well known and respected as a leader in conservation. So they were a really great group to help us facilitate new connections. The planning phase comes next, always with a human-centered design and input from community members. In our school-based projects, teachers were really the driving force providing input for these programs. The implementation phase includes working with community members and leaders and really working alongside with members of the community to implement the project. The final step is to take a step back again and look at the project and reevaluate what went well, what could have gone better, and adapt as necessary to make a project more sustainable for the next time. And that's why this is a circle and not a box. This should be a continual learning process. And the true measure of success is lasting community investment and whether or not a project will continue after you're gone. Native plants really make excellent tools to engage youth and community members. They're a low-cost investment, both in price and in personal time. They're generally affordable. They don't require many soil additives or mulching, and they're designed to propagate successfully in their natural environments after a couple of seasons of care. And this low investment makes them highly accessible. Small-scale gardening and plant propagation are also very accessible activities. And these skills can be learned and easily transferred, and activities can be adapted for all ages. Native plants are also resilient and built to tolerate climate extremes and soil conditions in their natural environments. And native revegetation projects are also incredibly adaptable and transferable to a variety of different environments. They can be tweaked to fit whatever environment you're working in. You don't need a park or a lawn or a backyard to really carry out these types of projects. Plants can be propagated and grown in containers. You can create hanging gardens from old 2-liter soda bottles. You can create raised platforms for the elderly and disabled. You can create rain gardens. Really, you can adapt these projects, again, to whatever materials you have to work with. And finally, the scale of these planting projects is quite versatile. Projects can range from small flower beds or container gardens to attract a specific type of pollinator to a real large landscape restoration effort, creating a riparian buffer or a large-scale stormwater filtration project. And this real-world applicability really helps connect people working on small-scale projects to larger possibilities on an ecological scale. Our project site was based in Portland, Maine. I want to be the first person to call out that Maine is one of the least diverse states in the nation, and we really don't have a lot of diversity on a national scale, but that doesn't mean a project like this is not important in our state or in our city. And there's still plenty of barriers to inclusion across communities here. So looking at Portland with an asset-based lens and thinking about what it has, it is Maine's largest and most diverse city, and diversity has been increasing steadily over the last decade. Immigration has really been a key driver of population change in the city. Portland is really invested in growing and attracting new immigrant populations and encouraging cultural growth. Portland is also a very natural resource-rich city. There are 66 parks and playgrounds spread out over 22 square land miles. So this means there's extremely high proximity to city parks and green spaces. Almost 90% of residents live within a half mile of a city park, and that's based on spatial data from the city of Portland. And a 2017 study by the city of Portland found that although access to parks could be improved in some neighborhoods and parts of the city, there were no real critical barriers to park access across demographic or socioeconomic groups. And this was a huge benefit for the purposes of our project because access barriers are often quite unevenly distributed among these groups. And it's usually the first thing that you need to look at when you're considering a project with an inclusion focus. Remember, a part of the diagram I showed earlier was to be a community asset and add capacity to programs that are already working well. There was already a lot of energy behind native plant and pollinator restoration initiatives in the city of Portland. Several community-based organizations or non-governmental organizations had already been working with the city government to create a Portland pollinator vision plan. So this plan was already in place, and there were already a lot of squeaky wheels working with the government to turn exotic plant gardens into native plant gardens across the city. Maine Audubon Society was also already engaged in programming at Portland Public Schools and had worked with several of these NGOs to help push and implement the Portland Pollinator Vision Plan. So at the Coastal Program, we had the opportunity to tie into and add capacity to some of these existing things that were already going on in Portland and draw from community resources to help make our involvement more meaningful. Our first case study involved working with the Portland Public Schools Language Learning Academy. This was a summer school program that combined all of the middle school and high school students enrolled in the Portland public school system who spoke English not as a second, but as a third, fourth, or fifth language. And many of these students were recently resettled refugees or asylum seekers who had had varying levels of education, and some had had interrupted education. So this summer program was designed to help teach language skills and introduce students to some of the scientific and technical language that they would encounter in the classroom. What we really brought to the table here was a focus on conservation as a unifying curriculum theme. In Maine, Audubon worked with students to propagate plants in the classroom. We did native plantings on school grounds. We developed some experiential education lessons with a native plant and pollinator theme. In this picture on the right here, we made paints out of different types of soils and plant dyes and did an art project with the students. But our real goal was to help facilitate a larger community connection for these students and build a safe connection to nature in their new home. Some of these students had been through harrowing immigration journeys to reach the US, or were coming from places where the wilderness was not safe. So we really wanted to help facilitate a safer connection with nature in their new home. So we led walks through parks to get students acquainted with the local flora and fauna, and we worked with staff at a National Wildlife Refuge to arrange an interpretive field trip about 45 minutes outside of the city. And again, our hope was to connect them to nature as a peaceful component of their new home. And through our walks and our experiences, students also had the opportunity to share their languages and share their cultures. We learned that hummingbirds, for example, in the US or in English, they hum, and in other countries, in other languages, they kiss flowers. And this was really as much as about learning from the students and appreciating their cultures and their languages as it was to teach them about native plants and pollinators in their new homes. So the final piece of this project was providing training to conservation groups and Fish and Wildlife Service staff across the state. So we partnered with the local refugee resettlement program, Catholic Charities, which offered a training specifically focused on educating people about the refugee experience. But there is also an emphasis on cultural competencies and a consideration of cultural and implicit bias. We worked to tailor this training specifically for Maine audiences, and we were honored to work with a member of Passamaquoddy Nation, Bridget Neptune. She's pictured on the right here, who had done a lot of work in the greater Portland area to educate people about the past, present, and future presence of Indigenous nations in Maine. We thought it was a more honest approach. Before talking about welcoming refugees to a new home, acknowledging the people who are already here and who are still here today. This helped us to frame the training and add that extra layer of awareness. And this served as a forum for Maine conservation organizations to help identify some of their own cultural biases and the invisible barriers to inclusion within our organizations. Our next case study focuses on a prominent city park that was conveniently right across from King Middle School in the city of Portland, which happened to be the largest and most diverse middle school in the city. Maine Audubon was already working with middle school teachers and students in these classrooms, and we put our energy in close collaboration with teachers and administrators, not just into restoring native plant habitat as a shrubby understory layer in this park, but transforming the space right next to the school into a permanent outdoor classroom. And the idea was that this would be a lab which could provide continual learning opportunities for the students. So this took cooperation from the city government and longstanding investment from the school to help maintain these habitats. We started by restoring little plant communities that the students had grown and studied in the classroom as this herbaceous and shrubby layer in the understory. And the students also added an interpretive component. You can see here a wood chip trail that they added, but we also installed posts and posted QR codes on these posts. And so if you have a smartphone nearby, I really invite you to try this out and see how it works. This is a QR code that you're seeing on the top left screen. And if you're not familiar with these, it allows you to point your smartphone at the icon in the top left corner, and this should give you an opportunity to link to YouTube to see a video of what's going on here. And the students of King Middle School made these videos as part of their classroom project. So I will share this video in my next slide, but I also invite you to follow along on your smart devices. Just give me a second to remember how to share my sound.
My name is Isabella. Thank you for stopping by this station of the Bringing Nature Home interactive guide to our urban understory. You will notice that in this station we planted American witch hazel, zigzag goldenrod, and smooth aster. We plant only native plants here because native plants attract native birds, like the ruby-throated hummingbird, the tufted titmouse, and the blue jay. Do you see the blue jay? Do you hear it? Throughout the growing season, birds feed on seeds, berries, and nectar these native plants produce. Other birds also feed on native insects that are hosted by these plants. Insects like the blackberry looper moth and the goldenrod gala moth and the pale banded dart. Can you believe that this group of plants is host to an average of 81 native insect species? Are you sold on native plants yet? Well, did you know that baby birds can't get the nutrition they need from seeds? They need insects like caterpillars, native caterpillars. Don't you want more baby blue jays and tufted titmice here and in your yard? They're so cute. And do you know what doesn't have native caterpillars? Nearly every plant you'll find in the gardens on your street. That's right, plants like hydrangeas and yellow irises and tulips aren't host to native insects at all. Poor baby birds. So what can you do? Ask your local garden store to see the native plant section, or contact me in Audubon for advice on what to plant. Choose plants that will help restore native breeding and habitat for birds. Let's all do our part to bring nature home to Portland, because we live in Maine, the way life should be.
So once again, a middle school student designed these videos, and the idea was that Portland Public Schools could change these videos year after year as they studied different things in the park, and future classes would also have the opportunity to make educational videos. One really great thing about QR codes is that they allow people to connect to content through a smart device, and this can allow for translation services too, and any other accessibility services or apps within that smartphone. So rather than, there were 25 different languages that were spoken by students in the Portland Language Learning Academy. So rather than making 25 different signs in 25 different languages and still potentially leaving somebody out, we thought these QR codes were a great way to let each person connect with the content individually. Our last case study is in a Lomo area on the Western Promenade, which is another prominent park in the city of Portland. You can actually see the White Mountains of New Hampshire here from this location on a clear day. This was designated as a low-mow area in the Portland Pollinator Vision Plan and had actually gotten some complaints from residents as just being a ungainly plot of overgrown weeds where nefarious activities were occurring. So Maine Audubon and the coastal program worked to pull the invasives out of this lot and reestablish native plants that could compete with the long grasses and with the weeds. And we added an interpretive sign to encourage people to come over and look at the plot rather than just a hands-off and keep-off approach. This was also planted with the help of second grade students from Portland Public Schools. And the picture at the top is what it looked like in 2017 when we put this garden in. And by 2019, it was self-sowing and self-propagating. And the city had written into its plan to mow this every other year, but to my knowledge, they haven't needed to mow it yet. I'd like to close by revisiting the model for our project design and how it can be used to scale up a project. And I'm going to take a direct quotes from my friend Eric Topper at Maine Audubon here. I just love the terminology that he used to describe this, and I thought it was spot on. Eric described this as a native plant and community engagement wheel. And once we were able to get this wheel spinning in Portland, we were able to focus on adding material from the outside in the hopes that this could become a snowball and pull in other support and other resources. And we've seen this happen with some of our projects and maybe not so much with others, but again, that's why this is a circle. You're always encouraged to go back and learn from your last project. And once again, the true measure of success is creating something with a community that is self-sustaining and continues to grow when you're gone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirstin. That was an amazing presentation, and I think everyone would agree. The video and definitely the QR code seem to be a major hit with everyone. So you may be getting questions after the fact from us for exactly how the QR codes, you guys are able to implement that and how that works. So you can be on the lookout for that, basically.
Great, thank you.
Our next topic has two presenters, beginning with Tim Fredricks. Tim is an environmental engagement manager with Bayer U.S. Crop Science. He has 10 years experience with Bayer Crop Science and is responsible for coordinating projects and outreach directed towards bees, monarch butterflies, and other pollinators or species of concern. He earned a PhD in environmental toxicology from Michigan State University, where he conducted a large-scale field study on several bird species, examining the ecosystem for potential effects from exposure to industrial contaminants. Personally, Tim is active in the Three Rivers Beekeepers Association and enjoys an active lifestyle with his young family, centered around family activities, gardening, native landscaping, honeybee and fowl keeping, knitting, woodworking, hunting, fishing, cycling, running, and ice hockey. Tim, whenever you're ready, you can begin sharing your screen and begin your presentation.
Okay. Donna Marie, are we working?
Yep, I can see your screen. Everything looks good.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, now we've heard from Kirstin and Mary about how getting this habitat in our landscapes and in our communities is so important. And really what I'm gonna talk about is really how we can record that habitat and really document it within a system that maybe could help add up all of those little efforts to count towards the large effort we're all working towards to really help with the monarch butterfly. And so specifically for Missouri and the monarch, really, when you look at the migration map of the monarch and how they travel across the United States, you notice that Missouri is right in the middle of that corridor, and a large portion of those migratory monarchs are passing through Missouri, both on their spring migration heading to those northern breeding grounds, but also on their fall migration that we're just tying up the ends of here, where they need both the breeding plants on the way north, so they can get that next generation going, so some milkweed, but also some nectar plants, right? So that they could have some food going north. And then on the way back, we actually get a fairly good production of some overwintered butterflies, overwinter generation butterflies that are going to be heading south to Mexico, and sort of not only fueling up, but sort of that last generation of reproduction as they head to Mexico to overwinter. So we're really in the crossroads of the monarch migration. So we're really well positioned to really help and provide habitat. And we've seen some great examples and pictures, and I really like to highlight just that it doesn't have to be large swaths. It can be, right? Like it can be anything from those little parking lot islands to your corner parkway or your yard, your neighbor's yard. There's some great examples of where where we could all do a little bit to really help add some habitat, whether that's nectaring plants or actual milkweed, where we can have some reproduction occurring for these monarchs. And some of the things that often we don't think about, and when we're putting in these smaller habitats, is the nature of a monarch female, right? So she is really out there when she is reproductively active. She is looking for diverse and far-ranging areas to really spread out her eggs. So she'll lay those 2, 3, 4, 500 eggs that she's going to lay in a lifetime. But the more areas she can lay those eggs, the better chance any one of those eggs has it to making to become an adult butterfly. So when we have these little pockets of habitat throughout our communities and throughout our cities, what happens is it gives that adult monarch the opportunity to reproduce in a diversity of habitats. And also when you bring it home, right, when it's at your house, when you're out enjoying your evening walk or hanging out after work, whatever, you actually get to see the biology of the monarch happening in your yard. And so for me, with our young family, I mean, we really enjoy finding those larval caterpillars out on the milkweed plants in the yard, and then watching them grow. And then we also participate in some of the activities that you can do with the adults, right? So in the fall right now, as those monarchs are migrating through our area, we keep a butterfly net by the back door and a pile of tags for the monarch on our counter. And so the kids, if they see a monarch in the backyard, grab the net, head out. They can net a migrating adult, bring it in. We'll get a sticker tag on there and help participate in that Monarch Watch program to track the monarchs as they migrate. So there's a lot of opportunities that these little small habitats can afford families and communities to get involved in conservation. And really these efforts can add up to larger efforts, right? So as we think about documenting this habitat, as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is making decisions on the listing or not listing for the monarch, voluntary conservation is a great opportunity to document the habitat and the work that's going on in the landscape. And there's two examples here: the New England cottontail and the sage grouse, where conservation communities have come together and really helped this species to the point where a listing decision was not needed, really because the work had been done and the species had been supported to the level that they really weren't needing of that additional protections of the Endangered Species Act. And so for the long-term preservation of the monarch, which is what we're aiming for, these habitat initiatives can really drive that conservation. And so what we have done is we've partnered with a subsidiary, the Climate Corporation, for the technical aspects, and then Iowa State and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop an app. And so this is an app that's available on your phone through iOS and Android. And what it does is it allows you to document those one-off habitat locations and really put that in to a larger database that then can be accessed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, so they can understand really what habitat initiatives are going on in the communities that we live and work in throughout the United States. And so the way this works is we help develop it, we help fund it. Iowa State houses it. They house the data, and so they are completely the sole source in this department within Iowa State. And then what happens is Fish and Wildlife can access that data through Iowa State University, so they can use the information that's imported there for their decisions that they're making and really understanding what's going on in our communities. What we'll look at next is just sort of some screenshots from the app, and it's really a fairly simple system. And all you're doing is you're identifying the habitat, and so you're drawing polygons within the system, and then the app will actually calculate the areas of that habitat. Okay, and then you put in some basic information, and what happens is it's aggregated up, right? So the app will never sort of say that there's this 0.13 acres of habitat with X number of milkweed stems at this location. So it's going to aggregate up at the county level. And so that we'll have county level information that'll be shared, and then that'll be passed along. And so it's been released for a few years now, so spring 2019. And really what's happening is we're getting entries from users and the public, and the more entries we can get, the more habitat that we'll see, and really we can not only put the habitat in the ground and really do what the monarch needs, but also document it so that it's recorded and it's something that we can be sort of proud of. And Donna Marie, that was my last slide. So we'll go on to Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Our second presenter on this topic is our very own Elizabeth Egan. Elizabeth is a communications coordinator for Missourians for Monarchs. She was raised on the edge of Kansas City, Missouri, and graduated from the University of Missouri with a BS in Parks, Recreation, and Tourism with an emphasis in Natural Resource Recreation Management. She's held positions with Missouri State Parks, Kansas City Parks, O'Fallon Parks and Recreation, and the Conservation Federation of Missouri before coming to Missourians for Monarchs. Elizabeth's diverse professional background working with state, municipal, and nonprofit organizations gives her a unique understanding of the various priorities among organizations when supporting pollinators. Elizabeth, when you're ready, you can begin sharing your screen and begin your presentation.
All righty. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Looks good.
Perfect. I will go ahead and turn my video on so you can see my face. Good morning, and thank you, Donna Marie, for that lovely introduction. Today, I will be discussing iNaturalist and how municipalities and communities can use this program to identify species and promote scientific research. First, let's watch a short video, and then we'll get going.
iNaturalist is a social network where anyone can record and share their photographs of living things. When you share a photograph on iNaturalist, it becomes more than just a picture. It becomes an observation. It's a record of an organism in a place at a time. Each observation is shared with a global community of naturalists, where it can be identified, discussed, and used to give us a greater understanding of life on Earth. Wherever you are, biodiversity is there too. Get out and observe it.
All right, so that's a nice quick little refresher on iNaturalist. And then I'm going to show you guys how to use the app and a little bit of background. Sorry, my slides are a little slow. So iNaturalist is a tool anyone can use to identify the plants and animals around them. It can be used on iPhones, Androids, and your computer. iNaturalist connects you with a community of over 1 million scientists and naturalists who can help you learn more about nature. By recording and sharing your observations, you'll create research quality data for scientists working to better understand and protect nature. Please note that this app is not intended for use on cultivated or captive species, such as houseplants or, such as houseplants or animals at the zoo. You can still use it to identify any plant or animal. Just make sure you click a certain box that it is not naturally found, and I will cover that in a few slides. So let's learn how to identify and submit sightings through iNaturalist. Today, I will be demonstrating with the desktop application. First, let's navigate to iNaturalist and click Upload. So that's the little green tab over here. Please note you will probably have to create a profile, but don't worry, everything is free and it is super simple to walk through. Next, you will either choose a photo or sound recording of your observation to upload. For today's example, we're going to use an observation of a plant I saw on the side of a road in June. I'll click choose the file, and then I'll go over here, click a clear photo or image, and then click open. Then once the observation has been uploaded, it is time to fill in the details. If you're not sure of the observed species, iNaturalist will automatically identify it for you, which I think is pretty awesome. So you can see here where I uploaded the picture, it says it's a milkweed. That is correct. And then down here, it says that they're pretty sure it's a purple milkweed. Well, this is my wheelhouse, so I know that to be correct. But if you're unsure about what it's identifying, you can always click, I think it's this. And then it will be reviewed by professionals and confirmed. Once you're done identifying, then you'll fill in the date, the location, and any details that you would like to include within the notes. And there is a privacy setting where it doesn't have to be a specific location. You can say county or the town that you're closest to. And then if it is found in a garden, at a zoo, like I said, if it's captive or you planted it there by hand, then you're going to click this little captive or cultivated. So now that we have submitted our observation, we're going to see if there's any other observations we can add. You can add more than one right here, and then we will submit one observation. Each observation made through iNaturalist is used by a scientist and naturalist. For example, if you make an observation of a milkweed or a monarch here in Missouri, iNaturalist will automatically send it to the data that Missourians for Monarchs is collecting for research projects. You can see our 4 projects right here that we are keeping track of. And then here you can also see our milkweed monitoring project for 2021. In the overview, you can see how many observations of milkweed are made in Missouri, how many species were seen, how many identified those species, and how many observers we have had thus far. And I know somebody questioned this, so here's that map. iNaturalist will even show you a map where milkweed species are being observed across the state. Having this information helps Missourians for Monarchs determine the priority of pollinator plot locations based on milkweed presence. So why do we suggest using iNaturalist? iNaturalist is user-friendly and provides information to scientists and naturalists so we can make informed decisions. An easy way to integrate any monitoring program into municipalities is to have parks or public works employees who are outside every day managing the landscape use the app for observations. For example, when I used to work in a certain park system, I'm not going to tell you which one, here in Missouri, we had a lot of seasonals that had issues identifying plants and whether or not they were beneficial. So if they would have iNaturalist, they can take that quick screenshot and then they can identify it through the app. And if it's native and they want it there, then they can just leave it. They can report their sightings if it's naturally occurring. Sorry, my timing is a little off on these slides. So their observations not only assist them in managing their landscape, but also assist community science projects. iNaturalist can also be used by municipalities to engage their communities in monitoring events. For example, a BioBlitz is an event that focuses on finding and identifying as many species as possible in a specific area over a short period of time. A BioBlitz, scientists, families, students, teachers, and other community members work together to get a snapshot of an area's biodiversity. So iNaturalist is a simple tool that connects your community with nature while assisting scientists in making informed decisions. Here are just a few resources for iNaturalist. If you have any questions or like to discuss a custom plan for how you could use iNaturalist with your community or organization or municipality, please feel free to reach out. My email is on the slide and in the chat, and then we will follow up. Donna Marie, that is all I have.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you both Tim and Elizabeth for providing us with all the various options and ways that we can collect the habitat data so easily, and also share it with the scientific resources who are interested. Our final presenter for today is Patrick Fitzgerald. Patrick is a graduate of Penn State University and a certified Maryland Master Naturalist. In his current role as Senior Director of Community Wildlife, Patrick leads the National Wildlife Federation's Community Wildlife Programs, which includes partnerships with nearly 800 cities, counties, and communities through programs such as Community Wildlife Habitat, Mayor's Monarch Pledge, and Trees for Wildlife. Through these programs and others, National Wildlife Federation is committed to helping wildlife and communities thrive by increasing tree canopy, implementing green and natural infrastructure projects, and promoting native plant gardening and landscaping. In 2015, Patrick created the Mayor's Monarch Pledge and authored a guide titled Monarch Conservation in America's Cities, a solutions guide for municipal leaders. Here to talk about the Mayor's Monarch Pledge is Patrick Fitzgerald. Patrick, when you're ready, you can begin sharing your screen.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to see if you can see my screen okay.
Yes, we can.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you, Donna Marie, and to Missourians for Monarchs for inviting me to present today. I consider myself a Missourian. I was born in Chesterfield, Missouri, many years ago. I'm a St. Louis Cardinals fan. My apologies to the folks from Kansas City, but my folks went to school at Mizzou. I spent my summers going to the Lake of the Ozarks and have family, in Kansas City, Springfield, Cape Girardeau, and across the state. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today, and I've really enjoyed the presentations we've had so far on this panel. So thank you. I also want to just quickly acknowledge 4 of my colleagues that I know have worked with Missourians for Monarchs over the years, from the beginning with the first state plan and some of those earlier meetings. So Rebecca Canonius-Pignon, who I believe is on the call, Julie Sibbing, Geraldine Hoey, and Naomi Edelson. So I just wanted to acknowledge them as I believe they've been involved in some of the previous meetings and work. So to start with, just a little bit about the National Wildlife Federation. So this is our mission, uniting all Americans to ensure that wildlife thrive in a rapidly changing world. And we are also very focused on equity and justice in all of our work. And that includes advancing more environmental justice programs and looking at how equity and justice fits into our programs like the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Our work is national across the United States. We're working to advance policy and conservation action from coast to coast and everywhere in between. And doing, we also publish Ranger Rick Magazine. Some of you may be familiar with our Garden for Wildlife program and Certified Wildlife Habitats, which we work together. It's a joint program in the state of Missouri with our state affiliate, the Conservation Federation of Missouri. I won't spend too much time on this, but just wanted to give you a bit of a sense of who we are as a national organization. And as I mentioned, our Missouri state affiliate is Conservation Federation of Missouri. We work closely with them, consult on things happening in the state of Missouri, and they're a wonderful organization. So let me jump into the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. And this is a program, again, that was started in 2015. We had some wonderful early support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So I want to acknowledge them. And before I dive in case I want to share that this program's not just for mayors. So we needed a short name for the program, but really any head of local government can take the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. That can be the head of a county, a town, a township, a village, even the president of a homeowners association, really of any community. And many partners, stakeholders, community leaders are also involved in these programs. So I just wanted to mention that up front. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of this program and a few examples of how this is happening in cities as a framework to advance what we're talking about here today, how municipalities can help with monarch and pollinator conservation. So again, just an overview of the program. We're helping municipalities advance monarch, butterfly, and pollinator conservation. And cities are doing this, communities are doing this by creating habitat and also educating residents on how they can create habitat throughout the community. We're working to ensure that there are equitable community benefits to these programs, and that we're thinking about perhaps marginalized communities within our city or county as we're doing this work and engaging them. And to date, mayors have engaged more than 4 million people and created over 6,000 acres of habitat. So the first ever pledge was in St. Louis, Missouri. So that's something that Missourians, I hope, can feel good about. This is from 2015. Our president and CEO, Colin O'Mara, is on the left, and Mayor Francis Slay on the right in front of City Hall. Mayor Slay was so passionate, and Catherine Warner, his sustainability director at the time, were just wonderful to work with, and they were doing so much work well before the mayor's Monarch pledge. And you can even see on the right hand side, kind of in the corner, some photos from Mayor Slay's garden that he had on poster board and there for the press event. So the pledge has its roots in Missouri. Since then, we've had now more than 900 pledges since 2015. So this program has really grown beyond our wildest expectations, and it continues to evolve and grow. In Missouri, we've had many pledges over the years. Currently, we have 10 active pledges for calendar year 2021. And just a little bit of background there. When we started the pledge in 2015, it was open-ended in terms of the timeline. So you would pledge once and kind of continue your actions, or if you completed them, you would wrap it up. This last year, we relaunched the pledge with a new website, slightly different and improved action items, and so forth. So you'll see that these are the 10 cities that are currently active. Many others have taken the pledge and been involved in the past, and we hope to re-engage them in the program moving forward. So I think we already talked about a little bit about Mayor Sly James from Kansas City, who's on the right here, along with the nonprofit BTG that was also mentioned in the first presentation. But there's just 3 steps to taking the pledge. You go online and take the pledge. Let us know your action items. I'll talk a little bit more about that. You take action and you report on the progress. So again, first you take the pledge online. This is what the portal looks like. You go to the website, click Take the Pledge, and that will help you get started. It's very easy to do online. And then you're taking action. So there's 3 categories for taking action: communications and convening. This is things like media and proclamations, convening different stakeholders to plan and strategize on monarch conservation. Program and demonstration gardens, which includes putting habitat on the ground, helping communities identify and access native plants and seeds. And the third is systems change. Systems change is looking at municipal ordinances and other ways to have big change within a community. I put a quick screenshot of the 30 action items on the right. It's more of an eye test than for consumption. We'll share the link with where you can actually see those, but there's lots of different ways to take action within this program. If you take 8 or more actions, you receive special recognition and a badge on your community's profile as a leadership circle member. And 24 or more actions, you will become a Monarch champion. And we've had about a dozen or so communities that have become champions over the last 6 years. And then finally, the third step, you're reporting progress. And this is really important. We ask that municipalities report progress at the end of the year. The reporting deadline is coming up of December 1st for cities to report on their 2021 actions. And this allows us to understand the collective impact of the network and really understand how this is, having that impact on the ground. We've streamlined our reporting process this year, so you report online a few general questions, and then you respond to your action items that you selected. So if you issued a proclamation, you'll share the date in a text box and a little information and upload a copy, and that's it. And so it's a pretty simple online system. Cities find many benefits to taking the pledge, earning that kind of national recognition, and having, especially for mayors as political creatures, to have some good press and attention is can be really good. Wanting to contribute to efforts to save, conservation efforts to save species, building community, engaging residents, and providing, NWF does provide support. And I think one of the best things is really being able to network with other cities and municipalities that are doing similar work to help save the species. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you take the pledge and join this network. These are some of the resources that we have. We have a members only online resource center for folks that do take the pledge. We have regular newsletters and webinars. We have a Facebook group that's actually open to anyone that is interested in joining, and then consultations and working, phone calls and emails with NWF staff. So on this slide, I want to share a few different things. So the important thing to note here is that this is a really flexible program. So it has 30 different action items, and it is allowing for locally driven conservation to do what really works in your community that aligns up for these actions. And we know that every community is really different. So this program can work on any budget. It can be a $0 budget all the way up to millions. And I think we've really seen both within our network. For a municipality that is new to monarch conservation, it allows you to start small. Like you can just pick 3 action items. That's the minimum number that's required to take the pledge. So you could issue a proclamation, have a demonstration garden, a small demonstration garden at an important community site, or even support a demonstration garden, and then perhaps direct your park department to swap milkweed for other plant material. And that meets the requirements of the pledge. We certainly hope that communities will do more, and that happens sometimes over time, learning from others and figuring out how to do this work. For some cities, it's already a priority, and it's an opportunity, like I said, to do more, to share knowledge, and so forth. And an example of that would be in Chesterfield, Missouri. They participated in our programs, the Community Wildlife Habitat Program, for over 15 years, have a very active Conservation Action Committee. They're hosting regular events related to pollinators and monarchs. They're supporting places of worship. They're holding big annual Earth Day events, have a big prairie at their central park. And so you can have credit for things that you're already doing while also doing additional projects. So you can really leverage that existing work. I know partnerships have been mentioned by many of the previous speakers, and I think through the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, you can engage partners that are either existing or potentially build new networks and build local capacity. So a city does not have to do all this work by itself. It can do it in partnership with others on the ground. And a good example, well, actually the Kansas City metro area project, I think, was a great example of that. And I also think of my colleague Rebecca Canonius-Pignon, who's been working on local monarch conservation networks for many years in the Lower Rio Grande Valley in Texas and San Antonio and some other locations. This can be done in rural or urban areas. So we have seen you know, from the city of Los Angeles to small rural agricultural counties in Iowa and other places. The approach may be a little bit different, but it's absolutely possible to do in these different types of communities. The work can allow you to put pollinators a bit more front and center, and wildlife, if not just monarchs. So some folks say it's a monarch thing. We care about pollinators and bees. You know, I think there's a lot of flexibility there. And as I mentioned before, this program is not just for mayors. Any head of local government can take the pledge. So I'm going to continue through my last couple slides here. I thought I would share a little bit about the city of Branson as another illustration from Missouri. Branson initially pledged back in 2016. I guess I'll say if anybody is from Branson on the line and wants to correct me or update anything, feel free to add it in the chat. But I know that Branson remains really active today, and originally their commitment was to 10 action items. And I looked at this press release, you know, from back in 2017, announcing the new mayor's butterfly garden dedicated in Branson. And just looking at this, I'm seeing 3 action items knocked off by basically one event. So there's an action item around communications, which is being done here through this press release and some of the related social media and outreach that was done for this event. So that's one action item. We have a demonstration garden. That's a second action item. And they're doing a free butterfly milkweed giveaway for residents at this event too. So those are 3 action items that are being done all at once. And of course, Branson was actually pledging at the leadership circle level and was integrating milkweed into other places and doing other things. But I thought it was a good illustration to show, you know, what that can look like. And you know, I wanted to just say a little bit on rural communities. So, you know, you don't have to be the city of St. Louis or Kansas City to do this work, or even medium-sized cities. We did some great partnership with the city of Columbia on some restoration a couple of years ago. But you know, rural communities and smaller communities are very active in the Mayor's Monarch Pledge Network. And I don't want to try and overgeneralize about what makes sense for rural communities, but I will say that you know, just because every community is different, but I will say some of the more common things that we've seen in rural communities has been proclamations. That can really be done at any level, any type of community. Convening community leaders to strategize on the best approach. Roadsides and rights of way. Honestly, it's a great strategy for urban, suburban, or rural areas. We've definitely seen that, but I think that is a popular one in more rural areas and agricultural areas. You know, the scale doesn't have to be huge. The city of St. Louis worked with partners, nonprofit partners in the school district to engage 50 or more schools and basically get the entire district involved. It doesn't have to look like that. It can be the 1 or 2 schools that might be in your county or area for the you know, the action item related to schools. And I think milkweed seed collection and swaps are also a really good low cost, no cost action item that are pretty popular in more rural communities. So this is my last slide. You know, for any municipalities that might be on this webinar right now, you can go directly to nwf.org/Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Starting December 1st, you can take the pledge from the website and make a pledge for 2022. And if you are an advocate, if you're one of the many Missourians for Monarchs members, resident, we have resources online to help reach out and engage your city or your mayor. And we have a template letter, other recommendations on how you can do this. And I know I've been working with Elizabeth and Donna Marie to share some other resources for this network. So with that, I just want to say thank you again for your time. This is the best email to reach us with questions and a couple useful links as well as my contact information. So thank you again for the opportunity, and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Patrick. So, and Patrick, it's interesting because even I did not realize that St. Louis was the very first ever mayor pledge. So yet another first for Missouri. Woohoo. Okay, so at this time, we will begin taking questions, and I will turn my camera back on now. Okay, and let's pull this over and I'll start answering questions. So if you haven't already submitted questions, by all means, you can do so now. Let me start at the beginning. So it looks like we have one question. This one, I believe, is for Mary. They're just curious about if you happen to know the manufacturer, make, and model of the seed collector that was shown in your presentation, Mary.
I do. It was Gray Wind Enterprises, and they're out of Syracuse, Utah.
Wonderful. Okay, and the next one, also for Mary. Do you know where the KC mayor got his Monarch bow tie?
I do not. So Kirstin took care of that with Bridging the Gap. I do know it was a hand-painted bow tie that she had made especially for him. So
That's awesome.
I could try and find out if somebody wants to know, but Kirstin's the holder of that information.
If you find that information out, Mary, just send it to me and Elizabeth, and then we can, we can share it out with anyone who's interested. Because that was a pretty cool bow tie, actually. I've never seen anything like that. I've seen dresses and blazers, but I've never seen a bow tie. Pretty cool. The next question for Kirstin: how many Audubon staff and volunteers were necessary to roll out all of the project components?
That's a good question. Well, I can break it down project by project. The Language Learning Academy, Eric Topper, the director of education, put a lot of his own personal time into that program. So that's just one staff. But for the Deering Oaks and King Middle School planting project, Eric Topper was there, but he also pulled in the city government. There were 6 staff from Portland city government there that day, as well as the arborist. And we had 3 classrooms of students plus their teachers putting that in. So altogether, that's a lot of people, but not a whole lot were Maine Audubon staff. But all that said, Maine Audubon has their own nursery where they were propagating some of these plants, and I imagine that takes a lot of staff time and volunteers to maintain that. They had that source. So, and the Western Prom, same thing. Audubon pulled in 2nd grade classes. Their staff naturalist also helped out at that project. So.
Perfect. The next question, also for you, Kirstin. Did you work directly with teachers to create the curricula for the middle school students?
For the summer language learning program, yes. We met with the director of the program, Carlos Gomez, ahead of time with Eric Topper. And then we met with teachers. The first year, it was just a seat of your pants. Like, it was a very crazy, busy program, and we were really just there planting with the kids and coordinating the field trip. But the next year we sat down with the teachers ahead of time and we designed the classes in a much more structured way and talked about like what we would teach and what we would add to the program. And we had an intern our 2nd year, Angela Chu, who came up with an outline and aligned that with STEM standards. But that said, that was a summer school program, so a really informal process. And I can pass that question along to Audubon, who works with the schools more formally year round. I imagine that process is a lot more complicated.
Yeah, and if you could send me that information, because it was a 2-part question. You actually answered the second part, but it was basically what was the process like? But as you just mentioned, one was a summer school and then one might, the other process might be very different. So if you do get that information, again, send it my way and then I can forward it on to the attendee, Ms. Daniel Fox.
Great.
So I will take care of that. The next one looks, it's for Tim. Is there a desktop version of Habitally? And if not, are there plans to make one available?
Right, so there currently is not, but I think that's a great suggestion, and we can see about adding that in. And I think that's something we could publicize with Missourians for Monarchs if we get that desktop version built.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you mentioned it during your presentation, because I was doing things behind the scenes, but it is currently on both Android and iPhone at this point. Because I remember initially it came out just iPhone, but there are now both versions, correct?
Yep, there's apps available for both versions.
Perfect. Okay, and next one looks also for you. Actually, it's for both you and Elizabeth. How does Missourians for Monarchs use the data from Habitally and from iNaturalist?
So yeah, let me just touch on, and maybe Donna Marie, I mean, in reality, I'll let you answer the part maybe on how Habitally is used for Missourians for Monarchs, but I just wanted to make a clarification that I don't think I mentioned, was that, you know, this is for individual or community type habitat applications that you would document through this Habitally app. Really, things like large plantings or CRP or things like that would be documented through those government programs, right? And both of those type situations, they roll up. It just prevents us from double counting any habitat activities.
Right, perfect. And then Elizabeth, if you want to answer for the iNaturalist.
Yeah. So the big thing about Habitally, like Tim was saying, is that goes to a national database for monarchs where they will make that decision as far as listing goes and priorities as far as habitat is available. But for iNaturalist, it's something that's super simple, as when you're identifying milkweed or a monarch, it goes right up to the cloud and we can pull directly from those sightings of all time. So I can create a project at any time and it can pull those sightings down based on the dates I give. And then we use that data as far as the priority of where to put pollinator plots, where we think, you know, these people are already planting milkweed. They are aware of, you know, pollinator habitat. We can approach that in a specific education voice versus this, you know, community doesn't have a lot of milkweed. So we need to start off at a different point and then work our way up to create more habitat in that area.
Perfect.
And then Donna Marie, you're the one that handles all of our data. Y'all, this woman is gone for a whole month at her computer compiling habitat data to submit to the national level. So you might have something to say.
So, and what I was going to add to it was for the Habitally data, it's not that Missourians for Monarchs specifically uses that data individually here, but because it is, as Tim mentioned, both Tim and Elizabeth mentioned, it is sent up to the national database, which is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the official name is Monarch Conservation Database. Because that information is sent up there, it gathers more data that we here in Missouri otherwise would not have our hands on. As Elizabeth just shared, I compile all the data for all the collaborative members, and I send that up and I enter that and upload it into the Monarch Conservation Database so that it is available for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to use during their listing decisions and whatnot. But if it's a smaller parcel, you know, maybe it's a school or a community or an individual landowner's plot, if they're not a member of the collaborative and they're not giving me that data, then it would not normally make it up to that database. But it is, as I mentioned in my intro, it's very crucial to know that, you know, that urban and suburban is there, because it will show a corridor, especially with Habitally, because it's on a map. And so it'll give a visual of corridors that can begin to form through that. So again, it's not that we use it specifically, but it is incredibly helpful to us, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and just everyone, all of us who are trying to create this habitat, if it is used, and it can send right on up. So next question is, looks like this one is for Patrick. And I think you answered it towards the end of your presentation, but it says, is the St. Louis Pledge in perpetuity, or does it need to be reinitiated?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say it has to be reinitiated. So the change we made to the program last year is that mayors have to repledge every single year. So when you report, you have the opportunity to repledge. And I think, with St. Louis in particular, over the last several years, Mayor Slay, Mayor Kirstin, and Mayor Jones have all three taken the Mayor's Monarchs Pledge, and that doesn't always happen, but they have, and we're hoping that Mayor Jones will repledge for 2022.
Awesome. That's encouraging. And then for Patrick again, how do you sustain involvement of city governments with staffing turnover and elected officials coming and going?
It's a very good question, and I would say it's challenging. So the example of St. Louis isn't always the case. So when you have mayors turning over, sometimes staff turns over, and sometimes it doesn't. So with the city of St. Louis, we were fortunate to have Catherine Werner, who's the sustainability director there, passionate and knowledgeable about monarchs, and she continued through those three administrations, at least initially. And so I think that's really important, to just kind of pay attention to the staff that you might have been working with or partnering with. We pay attention to that. Our local partners who are advocates are doing the work, do that as well.